Taxi and Uber drivers, the strangest, most interesting things you've overheard while driving a customer. I worked as a taxi driver while I was in university. Around that time, my girlfriend, who I'd been dating for about a month, confessed that she had another guy from Germany. She told me all about their relationship and admitted that she was planning to move in with him soon. We broke up, obviously. A few months later, I picked up a drunk couple near a bar. They got in the back and started kissing. I realized the guy was speaking German. We drove to the girl's house and she got out. Then the German guy said we were going to his place. On the way, he started telling me that he had recently moved in with his girlfriend and was finally waiting for her to leave for the weekend so he could cheat. He added that American girls were very susceptible to guys with accents and that his girlfriend had no idea how often he hooked up with other girls. As you might have guessed, it was the same guy. I drove him to Carrie's house without saying a word. I wonder how things are going for them now. You missed the perfect chance for revenge, my friend. Yeah, but at least two cheaters stayed in a relationship. You couldn't come up with a worse situation for them. I work as a Lyft driver. One time, around 11 p.m., I got a request to take 4 passengers from Boston to a casino in Rhode Island. It was at least an hour's drive, but I agreed anyway. I arrived, and 4 middle-aged Asian men greeted me. They explained to me in broken English how best to get there. Now for the weird part. While we were driving, they only said one word the entire trip: caramel. I'm not kidding. Grown men were sitting in my car and repeating the word caramel over and over. It wasn't a joke. They weren't laughing. There was no reaction, just caramel. They would whisper caramel, then sing it in different tones, sometimes in unison. Sometimes they would pause for 10 minutes and remain silent. Guys, it was strange. When we arrived, they offered me to wait for them and drive them back. I bailed. The weirdest shit ever. I'm not a driver, but once when we were in Vegas, I was riding in a taxi with my wife and heard our Pakistani taxi driver discussing my wife's appearance on the phone. He didn't know that I had studied Urdu while serving in the army. I had to give him a surprise, and I did. When he handed me the change, I said thank you, goodbye, and then sat there for another 5 seconds with a stupid smile, laughing at how he was having a stroke from the turn of events. Maybe he really was having a stroke. He was driving fine, so I think he was okay. Maybe just a spasm from the stroke went to his leg, and he unconsciously pressed the gas pedal. I once drove 2 divorce lawyers who were representing opposing sides in the same case. They spent the whole ride discussing ways to drag out the divorce process as much as possible. I assumed to make more money. Yes, they charge by the hour. It's a pretty common thing for lawyers to deliberately drag out cases to squeeze more money out of people. But when 2 lawyers from 2 sides conspire with each other, that's really going too far. It was night, and I missed the last bus and called a taxi. As soon as I explained to the driver where to go, his phone started ringing. He apologized and closed the partition between us so I couldn't hear him. But something must have gone wrong because I could hear him very clearly. And I clearly heard him whisper, "I'll take a kilo, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Then he lowered the partition, apologized again, and, as if nothing had happened, started asking me about the recent soccer match. What a nice driver. To clarify, this was in South Florida, so there's a huge chance he was talking about cocaine. I even gave him a tenner for finding a shortcut that saved us 15 minutes. Taxi drivers are ideal candidates for transporting stuff. They're constantly on the move, and they rarely get searched. Plus, if you get caught, you can come up with a lot of plausible excuses. I had one regular passenger, an older woman, who constantly had to look after her 5 grandchildren because her children couldn't handle them. I drove her to shopping malls, to the bank, dropped the kids off at school. I did a lot for her. And then she started calling me at night, and it turned out she was working as a prostitute. I worked as a taxi driver in Boston for a while. One time, a very beautiful couple got into my car, or rather, I thought they were a couple, although the man was clearly older than his companion, and they started discussing their move from Boston to Paris out loud. I got very interested, so I decided to ask when they were moving and for how long, to which I got the answer, "We are flying tomorrow." And then, during the conversation, it turned out that the man was married to another woman. His wife went somewhere for the day, and he decided to take advantage of the moment to quietly pack all his things and run away from her and his 3 children. When I dropped them off, the man asked if I wanted to take them to the airport tomorrow. I refused, which is why he didn't leave me a tip. I should have said yes and not shown up. Screw those assholes. I work as a taxi driver, waiting for an order now and writing this post. About a year and a half ago, a few guys got into my car near a student campus and asked me to take them to a city that was a 40-minute drive away. There was a decent amount of money to be made. While we were driving, it became clear that the guys were going to the student campus to sell cocaine near the club. They often switched to Spanish, which I partially understand, and if I understood correctly, then they managed to sell about half a kilo. When they paid me, I noticed that they had huge wads of cash. The funniest moment of the whole trip was when their leader started freaking out and demanded to stop by for some soda. I think he was under the influence of his own product. Luckily, I had a sealed can of energy drink on hand. He drank it and left me almost a 100% tip. It was one of the most profitable trips ever. A guy was sitting in the back seat and discussing on the phone a story about when he shit himself. In all details, I work for Uber as a side job, mostly at night. I always start my shift in the party district near the university. Here are my favorite passengers. A 20-year-old girl who repeated the word pancakes the whole trip. And she did it so abruptly. Pancakes. Her slightly less drunk friends were sitting next to her and apologizing for their friend. A couple who were sitting in the back and doing all sorts of dirty things. I think it was a one-night stand. My only request was not to make a mess in the back. They listened to me. An Asian man in his 50s, whom I picked up in the Korean district. He spent the whole way trying to convince me that a woman should be slapped for prevention, so she would listen. I wanted to tell him what an idiot he was, but I was too tired and understood that it would end with me throwing him out of the car. In general, no matter how interesting the overheard conversations are, the most interesting trips are when lonely passengers talk to you like a counselor. For me, Uber is like a bar, only without a hangover. Most of my passengers are very cool guys. I often get invited to parties. One day I'll go to one of them. Maybe. I was finishing my night shift, drove my last passenger to MSP, Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. I'm just driving away when I see a guy, about my age, sitting by the side of the road and crying. In such moments I try not to stop, because knowing that a traffic jam will immediately form behind me, but there was clearly something wrong with him. So I still decided to stop and find out what happened. I jumped out of the car and asked if he was okay. The guy somehow gathered his strength and, choking back tears, began to explain his situation to me. He needed to get to Duluth, Minnesota, a 2.5-hour drive, but none of the taxi drivers wanted to pick him up as it was already too late. And at that moment, I was struggling with a terrible depression, which was like an endless war that I couldn't win, and felt a strong empathy for him. All he needed was a little help. I showed him my driver's app on my phone, pointed to the Uber sticker on my car, and offered to drive him for free without any meters or fees. He agreed, gathered his things, and we drove to Duluth. We didn't talk, there was no need. About an hour into the trip, he came to his senses and asked me to make a phone call. I agreed. From his conversation, I overheard that he had lost everything. His wife and children had recently died in a car accident. He lost his job, lost his home, and he needed to get to his father in Duluth, who was dying. When we arrived, he tried to give me some money, but I didn't take it. I was struck by the very fact that he offered me the last thing he had, a few crumpled bills and pennies wrapped in a sandwich wrapper. He was clearly very grateful, despite having lost